Hey everybody, this is Ben Bowman and Alex Titus. Welcome back to another episode of the Oregon Bridge.
We weren't interested in the jockeying and having it be all about the power. We wanted it to be about results. I'm a big believer in public higher education and what it can do for people and the economy of a state. I think it's important to engage and always have believed that. And OBI represents about 1,600 members that employ about 250,000 people across the state. We believe that the change we're seeing in the climate is real. I mean, that's science.
All right, folks, we were very excited today to interview Angela Wilhelms. Angela is the president of Oregon Business and Industry, which is the largest business group in the state of Oregon. It actually was founded about 4 years ago by the merger of the Oregon Business Association and AOI, two of the largest business groups at the time. And it's one of the most influential groups in Oregon politics. Angela also has a really interesting background herself in Oregon politics. She worked as the press secretary for Congressman Greg Walden. She worked as chief of staff to Representative Bruce Hanna, who eventually became co-speaker Bruce Hanna. So she served as chief of staff when he was co-speaker and when he was Republican minority leader in the House. She is an attorney who worked in private practice, and she also was the first person to ever hold the job of secretary to the Board of Trustees at the University of Oregon. When Oregon allowed universities to have their own local governing boards, she helped get that up and running for the U of O. So we talk a little bit about all of those things in terms of her background and how she navigated her path in Oregon politics. But we also talk about some policy issues. We talk a little bit about manufacturing. There's some big news this week with Intel, and we talk a little bit about that and how Oregon could be more competitive in manufacturing. We talk about businesses' responsibilities and obligations in tending to the climate crisis that we're navigating. And we talk about Oregon and Oregon's political culture and the urban-rural divide and building a sense of community and a shared narrative in this state. So we cover a lot of ground, and I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. We certainly enjoyed having it. So if you haven't, please remember to give us a 5-star rating if your platform allows it, and definitely click the subscribe button. And we also want to promo our YouTube channel. So most of our listeners are listening over on the audio format, but if you're interested in the YouTube format, check out our YouTube channel. We're getting increased growth there. So go ahead and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't yet, or keep listening on podcasts. We don't really care. We're just glad that you're listening. But thanks for being with us, and let's jump right into the interview with Angela Wilhelms.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Oregon Bridge. Today, we are very excited to bring you Angela Wilhelms. Angela, how's it going today?
Good. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And where are you, I guess, well, dialing in from is not the right word because, of course, we're on video, but where are you at in the great state of Oregon today?
I am in Wilsonville, which is the good happy medium between Portland and Salem. So we have offices in both locations. So this was a nice landing ground for me.
Nice. Very good. Very good.
The most manageable commute to Salem is Wilsonville. You just hop on.
I get in right after all that traffic going south. And if I'm coming from Portland, I can get off I-5 right before I hit all the traffic.
Yep. The perfect spot.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, you dodge a lot of traffic, which is definitely nice. So Angela, you have a really interesting background, particularly to me, because I haven't worked at a major university before, but I did go to the University of Oregon. So maybe that counts as something. But we know that you worked in DC for Congressman Walden. You also served as chief of staff to Speaker of the House, Bruce Hanna, and you spent some time at the University of Oregon working with their board of trustees. So could you fill us in a little bit kind of more on what you did with each of those roles, and then how it led to your new role, which we'll talk about in just a second?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started out after college thinking I was going to do corporate finance. That was going to be my career path. And then I was in the Bay Area and decided I wanted to come home to Oregon, and managed to get a job working on campaigns. And like a lot of people, I think this is the story, you get hooked. I'd grown up around politics, but I had sort of sworn that I wasn't going to work in politics. And then once you do it, you catch the bug. So I did some campaign work and then went to work for Congressman Walden in DC doing communications, which was an extraordinary opportunity, just for all the reasons you might think. But then when you work for a member of Congress who actually was a professional communicator, it's like getting a graduate degree while doing your job at the same time. So I'm grateful for that opportunity and loved being able to work for someone who represented the eastern and southern part of the state. I'm a native of Klamath Falls, so it was good to be able to be over there. And then I was drawn back to Oregon. I just kept wanting to come back here and live and work. And so I got back into state level politics and went to work for Representative Hanna. We joke that we had kind of an arranged marriage. Some people were like, this guy needs a chief of staff and you need a job. You two should meet. Have you met yet? And so we had this kind of awkward first initial meeting in his office, and it ended up being a tremendous, I think, 7-year stint that I was able to work for him when he was the minority leader. And then this extraordinary period of time in Oregon House history where we had the tied 30-30 chamber, and rather than jockeying to see which party was going to eke out the other one for the true majority, we just split it. We redesigned the House rules and did a co-governance model, got a lot of national attention for it. And it was an exceptional learning opportunity. And I think we got some good things done for the state.
Before we go on from there, what do you remember about the origins of that arrangement? Because there had been ties in the past, and I think that's actually how Peter Courtney first became Senate president, was there was a tie and he was like a more palatable choice to the Republicans than, I believe, Majority Leader Kate Brown at the time. So how did this, like, you know what, let's just create something new, let's split it framework get started?
Yeah, we didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about other models, and I don't know what went into the Senate negotiations in the past. I wasn't around then, but it was clear in the Republican caucus, at least, that Representative Hanna was going to be their leader and kind of their in whatever form that took. And I think, I don't want to speak for the other caucus, but I think he was well respected by them. Even if they didn't agree with him, they knew him to be a pragmatic, thoughtful leader, became a budget expert. He was good at his job. And we weren't interested in, sadly, what you see a lot of in politics now, which is the jockeying and having it be all about the power. We wanted it to be about results. And so we, I don't remember, it's funny, I don't remember the exact sort of conversation where we all sort of said, let's do that. But it just felt like the natural thing pretty much from the day after the election day. Sure, would it have been nice to have the speakership outright? Yeah. But this just felt like the right solution. And the Democrats had Dave Hunt had been their speaker, and they emerged with Arnie Roblin from the coast as their selection for co-speaker. And I think the members just all kind of knew that these two guys together could actually do it. I think it requires that combination of two people who could pull it off. That not everybody could do that.
Totally. I don't think I've ever met someone who didn't like Arnie Roblin. So
I don't know how I'd like to talk to that person.
Right.
I don't either. He's an extraordinary person. And so yeah, it's a great question. I wish I could remember if there was just some specific moment, but it just kind of felt like the right path. And then of course, you go and talk to the House clerk, who, the parliamentarian, and you try to explain what you're trying to do, and you can see like the eyes get real big, and and then you tell the Senate, like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. We're gonna have two of everything. Don't worry about it. It's gonna be fine. Nothing could possibly go wrong. But it worked. I mean, we even split the speaker's office. Everyone thinks we inflated the speaker's office budget, but we didn't. We just split it down the middle, and we got half, they got half, and
it got national accolades.
We flipped a coin for the office. We did flip a coin for the speaker's office.
Who was it? Who was that? Was that Representative Hanna.
Representative Hanna got the speaker's office behind the chamber.
Okay.
So
very cool. So then you end up leaving after the shared session. Where did you go next?
Yeah, so during that session, just before it, and then because I hadn't prognosticated that we had been in the speaker's office, actually had gone back to grad school. So during that time, I got my JD MBA from Willamette. It's nice, you can sneak out the back door of the Capitol, walk across the street, go to class, sneak back in before anyone knows you're gone. And so I actually went and practiced law I finished school, and then I went and practiced law with a firm called Dunn Carney in Portland. Terrific firm. They gave me a shot, and they've also been very gracious, because I didn't, within a year, I had made the decision. Then I got approached about the job at the University of Oregon, and thought that was too unique of an opportunity to pass up. So the firm understood, and they were very gracious. And I thought I might go back after a few years, but then I got sucked in at the U of O for 7. And I was hired there. Some of your listeners may remember, in Oregon, we had the Oregon University system, which had governance authority over all 7 public universities. And a bill was passed in 2013 giving the universities the option to have their own board. And all 7 of them said, yeah, we'll take that door.
We'll be in charge of ourselves, please.
Yeah, well, and it just makes sense. They're all so different. They're very different institutions. So the one size fits all approach was not conducive to their needs. So in 2014, Portland State, Oregon State, and the University of Oregon got their institutional boards up and running. And so I was hired as the first university secretary, but to kind of help get that going. And there was a lot of work done before I started. I don't want to diminish that. It was a lot of preparatory work went into that, but just to figure out, both operations, and then also start to then wrestle with governance issues, whether it was policy work or strategic projects or whatnot. So I was sort of drawn to that entrepreneurial nature of that job. And I'm a big believer in public higher education and what it can do for people and the economy of a state. So it was a great opportunity to give back in that way. So, and then, one thing I think all those jobs have in common is an element of public service. I think it's important to engage, and always have believed that. And so I've been proud of the work I've been able to do in those spaces. But it was, getting time for me to think about what was next. And then the opportunity at Oregon Business and Industry opened up, or was going to open up, with the retirement of my predecessor. And I had gotten used to not being in Salem or around legislative politics, and that wasn't a bad thing. But I'd spent a lot of years watching what was happening, especially to the private sector, and the treatment it was getting out of policymakers. And I thought, well, sorry, my cat is uncontrollable. She'll make an appearance every once in a while.
We are we're pet friendly.
His name is Clyde Drexler.
Everybody, now you have to check us out on YouTube so you can see the cat.
Clyde the Glide.
Clyde the Glide. Where I don't even know where I was. Oh, but so I just decided, once again, I can either sit around and complain about what I see happening, or I can get back involved. And if this board is willing to give me the opportunity to try to help, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't take it and try to get back in the game. So it's been a pleasure.
I want to talk a little bit about the timing of the job too, because if I'm not mistaken, you started in last September, correct? September 2021.
Yeah, I started half-time, and then I started full-time in October, really.
Okay, so you've really only been full-time with the position for, I guess, 3-4 months now. You definitely come in at, I would say, a very interesting time. We have a global pandemic happening. Inflation is at 7%. The employment market is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen, because people are saying they can't hire people, but then there's like hundreds of people applying for jobs still. So everything seems to be sort of crazy mismatched. And obviously, I would just say things are kind of in like a general state of turmoil, especially for the business community. And I don't even just mean in Oregon; I mean across the country. What is sort of the general, like, what is the general feeling right now of your members of, and obviously I'm sure they have comments on national affairs, but obviously we'll keep this to Oregon. But what are kind of people feeling right now? Obviously, you represent both some of the largest businesses across the state, but then also some smaller organizations as well. What's kind of the general feel of things right now?
Yeah. So OBI represents about 83% of our members are small businesses, and but we have about 1,600 members that employ about 250,000 people across the state. We and they run the gamut. We have all sectors, all geographies are covered in our membership. So there's a lot going on. They're exhausted. That's probably the word I would use. They obviously, to varying degrees, depending on the business, have been impacted by this pandemic in myriad ways. Their workers have been impacted by the pandemic, and they're trying to be both good stewards for their customers and clients, but also importantly, the people they employ and the families that those employees support. So, they've been going through a lot of that, but then you layer on top of that some of the regulatory burdens and constructs that they're under haven't let up. In fact, more have been put on them during these times that aren't even pandemic related. So it's just this layering effect of constantly trying to know where the goalposts are and move the ball down the field toward them. And so I think they're exhausted, but they're also optimistic. I mean, this is just, I think, something that's in the Oregon ethos. We're inherently optimistic people, and so they're excited about opportunities. Some sectors are seeing growth during this time. And everyone's looking forward to the recovery, but they're challenged to a company. When I ask what's top of mind or front of mind for you, it's workforce. It's being able to fill positions. They can't keep up and fill the positions they need. It's the cost of doing business in Oregon. So those are the things that weigh most heavily, but yet they still, in all of our conversations, they're in it, and they want to grow, and they want to hire people, and they're excited about the opportunity there.
You kind of touched on one of the things I'm interested in. So you obviously work for a business organization in, we'll call it a deep blue state, acknowledging that that doesn't fully capture all of what Oregon is, but we've got a blue House, blue Senate, blue governor's office. And Titus mentioned the economic environment. The political environment right now is being upended somewhat. We're going to have new legislative leadership in both chambers for the next long session. We're going to have a new governor for the first time since 2010. It seems genuinely unclear who or what party, or if there will be a party represented in the governor's office. So, and at the same time, we're clearly not, I'm trying to think of Texas or a state that is like deep red, where the, policy agenda would look, I'm imagining, vastly different than the type of things you'll be pursuing in Oregon. So given we talked about the economic environment, but given the political environment that Oregon's in and its tendency to be a blue state, how do you think about your policy agenda or the strategies that you'll use to pass them? I mean, are you all getting involved in elections, or do you keep it to advocacy in the Capitol? And then how do you figure out what kind of proposals make sense for the Oregon context?
So about like 20 different questions.
I know. I'm talking, I'm like, this will not be easy, but riff on that one and we can go back.
Yeah, I'll try to sort through it and then circle back to what I missed. So I want to start first by saying I fall into the same pattern that you just did, but I wish we all didn't do this so much, in that defining pro-business and pro-jobs and pro-growth as blue state, red state conversations, because it's really unfortunate that that's where I know we all go there, and it's natural that we do. And for us, more than blue red, for us, what's important is balance.
Mm.
And I think you got there in your question, which is when you have super majorities and you have long-standing majorities with a blip of an interruption of a tide chamber. You have that same party in the governor's office for decades, which then informs who gets hired to run and work in agencies. So for us, it's less about the color that those people affiliate with, and more just about the sameness of it all, and the fact that it doesn't get shaken up a little bit, which is good for government, I think, to be shaken up and to have that accountability. The other piece is blue or red. The extreme nature of a lot of the politics now. This isn't just an Oregon thing. This is everywhere, where more and more elections are taken care of in the primary than in the general. And so you have folks running, especially in a midterm year, running to a pretty small segment of the population in a legislative primary, and then being responsive to those folks and the beliefs they put on the table when they ran. And the middle just kind of gets lost. And that's actually where a lot of the business community is. They're in the middle, especially in a state like Oregon, where the people who start and grow businesses here appreciate the historic nature of conservation in our state, appreciate some of the oddities of Oregon that make us who we are, public beaches, the bottle bill, all that kind of stuff. So I just want to, for us, it's about finding that middle ground and figuring out where business and where private sector employers can go and have a sort of home politically. We do engage politically. We have, OBI has a PAC. We actually have a candidate PAC, and we have an issues PAC. So we've been involved in ballot measures, but we do contribute to elected office, mostly legislative races. That tends to be where the bulk of the money has gone in the last couple cycles. So we are raising money, and it's all public online. It's fully transparent, so people can see who's giving, where we're spending. We haven't yet started that site, much of the giving yet this year, but we will certainly play, and we will try to be impactful in restoring some balance in Salem.
So then, the election will happen in November, and then we'll have a governor. We don't know who or what their background will be. What will are you all basically saying you've identified workforce as a huge problem? Have you identified these are the policy solutions we're going to bring to the legislature, or is that dependent upon the political dynamics at the time? And if you do know what you're going to be pursuing, if you could tell us a little bit about what are the policy solutions that your members are interested in for the workforce situation, for example?
Yeah, no, that's great. Our priorities are our priorities. We're pragmatic about, how you might want to shape the details of those priorities or go about them, but we won't change our stripes based on who gets elected or not. We might change strategy a little. We might change our expectations a little, but our stripes won't change. We're in the process of we're going to develop that policy agenda over the course of the year in greater detail. So I'll be going on a roadshow after the February session. So getting around the state, meeting with local chambers, economic development folks, and my members, of course, to talk to them about what specifically they need out of policymakers, whether that's legislators and the governor or regulators in the agencies. What specifically do they need? Our hope is that then we can craft a proactive agenda that we can hand to lawmakers and say, this is what we think the general business community, what the employers in your communities that you represent need. We do have a set of policy principles. They're on our website for folks to look at. They're we do them sort of we do them on an annual basis, but really the big shifts come every biennium, as you would expect, heading into each legislative session. So our board will vote on those in November of this year, but you can see what's on there now. We want to be thoughtful. The workforce one is a really interesting question. There's a lot of ideas. We're going to do some studying of what other states have done as well, to see what best practices we can peel off of. We think there are some great ideas that are already in place where private sector companies have partnered with community colleges, for example, on specific training and development opportunities. So I'll come back what did I say? They'll vote on them in November. I'll come back in late November or December, and we can walk through the list in detail. But yeah, and we, in reality, I won't pretend, we will put proactive things on the table. We have to do a lot of defense. And so there's a lot of things that we have to watch. And so we'll always be keeping an eye on that. And so that's why we root our work in these principles that get adopted, because we don't always know what other people are going to propose that affects our employers. And so we're constantly prepared to keep an eye on those things as well.
So, Angela, one thing that Ben and I love to talk about on this show is manufacturing and manufacturing policy. And we have a couple of questions to ask you, but we know that OBI also just came out with what looked to be a pretty major study on the state of manufacturing in Oregon. So before we dive into it, can you kind of just give us a brief overview of your organization's finding on that studies and kind of what the general field looks like for manufacturers in Oregon?
Yeah, so OBI is actually the state affiliate for the National Association of Manufacturers. So in addition to being the state chamber of commerce, which is, they're all a little different in every state, but that's the easiest way to describe our base organization. We all are also that affiliate. So we have over 300 manufacturing members in our ranks. And so we take that role very seriously. So last year we joined with the Oregon Business Council and commissioned Echo Northwest to do a study on the state of manufacturing. We believe it's an unsung hero in Oregon's economy. And we wanted to really understand its benefits and then think about the policy opportunities within that space. So a couple of the key findings. Manufacturing in Oregon employs more than 200,000 individuals. Wow. It makes up 8% of total employment in the state. You get into some specific counties, I think the number is it's about 18% of employment in Washington County, for example. So it's significant. And it's in almost every county has a significant manufacturing presence. Manufacturing contributes $33 billion to the state's GDP, which is 13% of the state's GDP. I want to pause on that for a second. 8% of total jobs. It's 13% of the GDP. It's an incredibly productive sector of the economy overall. And so that shouldn't be lost on people. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but it's highly productive economically. When we look at median wages in manufacturing, it's another thing that we looked at in the study. I think the median wage in Oregon is $47,000 right now. In manufacturing, it's $55,000. Wow. So that's a pretty significant jump. The other thing, when people think about manufacturing, it's this sort of catch-all term. Manufacturing is really diverse. Food and beverage production, people don't think of that. That's manufacturing. Certainly wood products is a long historical part of Oregon's manufacturing sector. Obviously, we have some high tech in semiconductor space and other electronics. And then we have heavy metals, which is a lot of times when people think manufacturing, they go straight to the sort of heavy industrial type of manufacturing. And we do have that. There's a chart in the report that actually shows the breakdown by those sort of big chunks within manufacturing. It's not exact, but it's pretty evenly spread among food and beverage, high tech and electronics, heavy industrial, metals, et cetera. wood products, and then sort of a catch-all of other. And most people don't realize that. They think it's one thing or another. It's everything from your, your Hydro Flask water bottle to the A to Z wine that you might drink to the plywood and the cross-laminated timber. And in Oregon, the other thing we noticed in that report, which I think is really cool, is nationally, manufacturing has dipped overall. There's been a decline in overall manufacturing jobs. Yet in Oregon, we've seen an uptick of 14% in the last, I can't remember if it was 40 or 50 years, but point being, a good uptick. So coming back to the thing I said about the highly productive piece, we wanted to know what would happen if we could grow manufacturing by 10%. Manufacturing in Oregon tends to grow at about 2.5% a year. So this is 4%. What would happen if we could accelerate that and do a quick jump to 10%? And I think these numbers are pretty staggering. They are, I'm probably going to get them a little bit wrong. So listeners, forgive me. You can read the report to get the specific statistic. 65,000 new jobs, more than half of which aren't the manufacturing jobs. They're
delivery or yeah.
Exactly. The people who are delivering raw materials or taking away finished product, the people providing food service to those folks, supply chain and consumer spending. So 65,000 jobs, 9 billion in additional state GDP.
Wow.
And we could argue about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm sure conservatives versus progressives might see this differently, but we think it's good because it supports state programs. $800 million annually in new state and local revenue.
Put me down as a yes and Titus as a no on that, I think.
Yeah. We'll come talk after if you get elected to the legislature and have your first budgeting session.
Sure. I'll have some ideas for how to spend it, I'm sure.
Yeah, but $800 million a year in new states. So when we think about, and when you're the business, the private sector employers, who often happen to be the first place the legislature goes when they want more revenue, we think this is a much more appropriate, healthy way to grow the ability to provide critical services rather than just increasing effective tax rates. Why don't we do it while also creating jobs for people and their families, and improving the quality of life? So it's a pretty, I'm glad to hear you guys like to talk about manufacturing. And we're pretty proud of our manufacturing sector in Oregon. We want more people to know about it. So we're going to be also embarking on some efforts to spread the word a little bit. And we think these numbers speak for themselves. But we got to be willing as a state to take advantage of this. I mean, it's not just going to fall in our lap. We got to want it.
I was going to say that there is an obvious follow-up question here that I will jump in with. So our podcast is coming on the heels of Intel's big announcement that they're going to spend, Intel, an Oregon company, is going to spend $20 billion in Ohio, building 8 factories to do a lot of manufacturing. There was some quote, you mentioned Echo Northwest, John Tapania has a quote saying, he's talking about Oregon, we're not ready for it, in part because I'm not sure that there's a clear aligned vision on just how badly we want this type of development. Duncan Wise of the Oregon Business Council said this should be a wake-up call, that there's an issue here. So can you help us explain why an Oregon company like Intel is going to Ohio? And from what it sounded like in the reporting, I don't have any information about this, but it didn't sound like Oregon was particularly close to getting this investment. So can you shed some light on that and maybe use that as an entree into what are the policy reforms that could enable the 10% growth that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I can't speak for Intel, obviously, but yeah, it would be great to have more investment here. The policy areas we focus on, and I agree with Duncan and John. Duncan and I have co-authored some op-eds on this topic, and OBI is working very closely with the Oregon Business Council on these topics. One of the issues is land.
Okay.
We don't have a lot of suitable land for, and again, going back to how diverse manufacturing is, therefore the needs of what any given manufacturing company needs out of its land can differ. Some need really deep topsoil, some need really flat land. Obviously, it's going to vary, but regardless, we just don't have a lot of suitable land. So an interesting statistic there is the site. I think the site of the Intel plant in Ohio is about 2,000 acres, and the largest piece of land we have to offer, similar to what they needed, is 200.
2,000
So
Ohio versus 200 in Oregon.
yeah.
So
So
is that like a zoning issue
the zoning
or?
issue. I mean, we have a unique and perhaps antiquated land use, system. So it's zoning. So the state policymakers have some work to do to think about how they want to prioritize, uh, and what they want to make available. So suitable land is a big piece. We're not naive. Suitable land for industrial is only so good if you also have land that's for schools and houses and all of the ancillary services for people around them. So it's complicated, but that's a big piece of the conversation. And that's not just a metro area thing. We hear that from folks in Bend and Medford and other places that suitable land is not just shovel ready, but like actually like it's big, whether the parcels are big enough or zoned appropriately, et cetera. Related is, when you have land, you need to have a transportation infrastructure. Manufacturers, and this goes for not just when we think about food and beverage manufacturing, but also agriculture. Or Senator Wyden said this once, and I loved it. I think he stole it from someone else, but I'll quote him, which is Oregon grows things and we make things. We're very good at that. And so, but we got to move those things. And so if a truckload of widgets is stuck on I-5 trying to get through, from somewhere in the South Willamette Valley up to the Port of Seattle or Port of Portland, that's pretty complicated when they're stuck on I-5 and can't get through. So, investments in transportation infrastructure. And then workforce training is a big piece of this. Making it okay from a policy standpoint for folks to want really good paying jobs in manufacturing, and thinking about how we can grow or accelerate access to certifications, job retraining, apprenticeship programs, things that can get skilled laborers, welders, folks who can build things, engineer things that aren't maybe going to a four-year university for those degrees, but they're getting good training and they're going to get good family wage jobs at the end of it. Both from a policy standpoint, making that a priority, and then allowing our schools to lead into that. So those are just a couple of the policy areas.
So
I would also, the last one I would add is, especially in the metro area, the layering of the taxation on businesses is hard. And so when you're thinking about, if you're a company that's here and you're thinking about growing, or if you've outgrown your facility and so you're going to have to site a new facility anyway, do you do it here or do you go somewhere else? Let alone kind of the conversation about recruitment.
So one follow up here, and then Titus can. This actually might be a good intro to Titus's next question. So, land use planning started in Oregon because of Tom McCall, and it was a ballot measure that I obviously wasn't around, but the intent, as my understanding, was like, we don't want to have the kind of sprawl that you see in places like Texas, or places where there's unregulated development and growth. And so, and part of that was like this identity that we have, like you mentioned, our sense of optimism, that we've also have this sense of like connection to the land and to the environment. And so, given the last 2 years, but it's been longer than that, where we've seen on the left, we call it like a climate crisis. On the right, they call it drought, wildfire, whatever, we're experiencing the same things. And so I guess I'm curious, what role do you see the business community having in responding to the climate situation, whether we call it climate crisis or whether we describe it in some other way? I think we all can agree that the natural environment in Oregon is changing in a way that's threatening, frankly, to both to the environment and to the economy. So I'm curious how you and your members, because I know you represent some on the business spectrum, pretty progressive folks, as well as some pretty conservative folks. So I'm interested if you have like any thoughts or reflections on where your members come down on that question.
Yeah. I had lunch with someone not too long ago, and he said that he's a business owner, and he said, he phrased it well, I thought, where he said, I've really learned that the OG conservationists are the timber guys from rural parts of Oregon. This is the guy who grew up in Portland, he's from Portland, his business is in Portland. And it's, I think you're right. There is this inherent love of protecting the land, and because what we've got is extraordinary here. And so I think we grow up here, and even if you come here from somewhere else, you very quickly realize that protecting that is a big part of our obligation. And it's, we're the weirdos who walk around some other state because we can't, there isn't a recycling bin on every corner. And so we'll walk around for 5 hours with an empty water bottle because we won't put it in a trash bin. We just don't even think twice about that. So I think that regardless of place on the political spectrum, most Oregonians I know have that inherently in them. And we believe that the change we're seeing in the climate is real. I mean, that's science. It's not, let's not go down that rabbit hole today. But you raise an interesting question. And what I would challenge policymakers to think of is this: as you think about policy that is meant to address or mitigate, address climate change or mitigate the harms from certain activities, you can't do it in a vacuum. And so if you're thinking about policies that are simply going to move the very same activity to some place not too far from Oregon, across what is really an arbitrary boundary that someone once decided should be the state lines of Oregon, are you actually helping the cause of climate change? Or are you actually doing nothing to help the cause, and you are also at the same time creating economic harm to the state? Are you potentially driving an operation to a place where they're not going to have the same ethos and operate with the same care as they would in Oregon? So I think it's just important that we think about this holistically. I think the other thing is, sometimes, there's a lot going on in government. There's a lot of different jurisdictions. There's a lot of agencies within those jurisdictions. I don't expect them to all know what the other is doing at all times. But the layering effect can be problematic. It can sometimes, things can be at odds with each other. We've seen instances where I won't get into any specific company examples here, but where you have a state policy or a desire for a state policy that does X, and you have a company that wants to do that, but yet they can't get a permit from DEQ to locate in Oregon. And so we're sometimes working against ourselves. So that it just, for us, it's people need to think about it holistically. They need to understand the long-term and downstream effects of what they're doing. At the end of the day, we all still need goods and services. And so doing that in a more responsible way, sure, that's great. Our folks are thinking about that all the time. one avenue that they're thinking about a lot is the federal efforts around reshoring domestic production of goods and services. Does everything have to get, shipped across the Pacific Ocean? Maybe not.
Yeah, in
Is
fact,
that good for climate? Yeah.
and what Titus and I have talked about is it's actually a national security concern that we have to ship a lot of these things overseas, as the pandemic has demonstrated.
Yeah.
But yeah, Titus, you should jump in with the next question.
Yeah. So, and sort of in the well, kind of a similar vein that Ben has been asking before, but one issue that we focus a lot on this podcast is the urban-rural divide, and basically what I mean by that is that urban areas tend to be getting higher population, richer, better education, and a lot of rural communities, not just in Oregon but across the country, tend to be losing population. Education systems continue to be getting worse, and there just seems to be sort of a lack of opportunity, especially when it comes to good paying jobs and things like that. I'm curious of how, if that's an issue that you all have thought about, or if that's something that you work on in terms of like what is the role for the business community and helping to kind of rebuild some of these rural communities, especially some of them that have been hit by the loss of timber jobs or the loss of fishing or agriculture and things like that. Curious if that's something that you all have started working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's important to me personally. It's important to the organization. Like I said at the top of the show, I worked for Greg Walden and Bruce Hanna, who collectively probably represented 2/3 of the state. I don't know. A lot of small rural communities and a lot of communities. And when I worked for them in sort of the mid 2000s and on, those communities were reeling from policy decisions from the last century, last millennium. Shall we be dramatic? But yeah, so it's really important. So yes, it's important to our members. About half of our members are outside of the Portland metro area, so it comes up a lot. It is a challenge, and this goes back to that piece about balance in the legislature and balance in the state. Educating folks on just how impacted rural communities are from seemingly small changes or policy changes. It's hard to draw that picture. So one of the things we'd like to do is get more people out, an exchange program, if you will, take people from Coos Bay to Pendleton, and from Pendleton down to Klamath Falls, and from Klamath Falls up to Bend, and Bend over to Astoria. Just bounce people around the state so they can understand how different parts of the state are, but really also how much they have in common when it comes to the issues that drive policy decisions. We are so again, this land use conversation, I think, is one that is of interest to rural communities because it's not just a metro area thing. The transportation piece is really important. If those rural communities are growing things and making things also, but they can't do that if they can't get their goods, to parts of the state where they're either crossing into another state or going to the port. So that's really important for us. That's a statewide solution. Like I said, the manufacturing conversation, I think it's 32, 33 counties have manufacturing as a strong presence, no less than 4%. And so thinking about what we can do for manufacturing in those communities is important. And then the educational opportunities. Our hope is that with infrastructure investments that are coming to the state, and hopefully what will happen with statewide broadband as a result of that, and then the advent of a greater comfort around remote learning and technology, we can educate people where they are without drawing them out of their communities. So there is a lot. It's very important to us. Do we have a silver bullet? No, but I think the first thing to me is just making sure people are even aware of what it's like to be in a community that's no more than a few thousand people and pretty far from the next place over. That's something that a lot of folks in Oregon don't. I can't fault them. They just don't know. They don't have that context.
Hmm. So my follow-up question, and this will be the last one for me, is
Are you going to put 20 questions in here like you did earlier? So
probably, yeah.
so your
You're gonna
last
have
one
to,
is actually 20 last ones. Yeah.
which is actually just means that you can pick your favorite and just
Oh, okay, good.
answer whichever one. So we have talked about the major political transitions in the state. And Titus and I have slightly different definitions of the urban rural divide. Like, I think part of the urban rural divide is also this lack of a shared narrative, lack of a shared community as a state, lack of togetherness. And so there's definitely challenges with big political transitions. There's institutional memory that's lost. There's potential like massive shifts in strategic directions, but there is also a fresh start part of this where perhaps there's an opportunity for us to try to start to build, and I'm talking sort of like separate from policy, right? Like, we're going to fight over policy always, but I think there have to be some solutions beyond that build kind of like what you're talking about, building relationships across the state, building a common set of understanding, building a common set of facts. So as the business industry has traditionally been one of the major players in the Oregon political scene. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on building a greater sense of togetherness in Oregon, and whether it be a recommendation for the next governor or something that you and your organization could do or is thinking about doing. What are your thoughts on building a greater sense of community and togetherness in Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Period. Does that count as an answer? No, it's really important. And now, back in the good old days, so I can sound super old, but no. So my father was in the legislature mostly before I was born. So this wasn't relevant to me because I was not around or in diapers. And so,
who was your dad?
Gary Wilhelms. He represented Klamath Falls.
Okay, cool.
During the 70s. And so, I grew up, and then he left the legislature and became a lobbyist. And I grew up watching people interact with each other who weren't from the same party, who were from different parts of the state. It was very natural. They would have dinner together. They would socialize together. Us kids would play together. They would banter and joke and then sit down and do the hard work from a place of mutual respect. If they couldn't quite get to mutual understanding, they could at least get to mutual respect. They would host each other in their districts to understand these issues. And that was a decade where there were big things, land use, PERS, beaches, bottles, all that kind of stuff. And so it was always sort of the norm, that's what I thought it was always about. And it's disappointing that less of that happens, and we could chalk it up to a lot of different reasons. Everyone is busier, everyone's at home on their own, computers and whatnot, and things have gotten more extreme, and there's probably a lot of political scientists doing research on this, because I don't think this is just an Oregon thing. But yeah, I think it's really important, and I want our organization to play a role in trying to get back to some of that. So that's when I talk about this kind of exchange program idea, or when we do when we get out and about and do tours of manufacturing facilities, I want people who, I'd love to have Speaker Rayfield from Corvallis, over in LeGrand or Medford with us, seeing what's going on. So those invitations will be forthcoming. My staff's probably mad because I'm, completely ahead of myself here. But I think it's really important because there is, people define the rural urban divide as east-west or valley or not, or Portland and the rest of the state. People define it as size or red county, blue county. I mean, you're right. People define it a bunch of different ways. And it's just not helpful to us to do that anymore. So I hope that we can um, bridge that I want to work. I'm really excited to get to know and to work with my colleagues who are at the local chambers of commerce and who really have a pulse on what's happening in cities big and small across the state, regional economic development offices, because I think people will find there's more in common. And if I can spend, my first year on the job, which would bring me to about October of this fall, if I can spend my first year doing some of that and listening, and then present some ideas to the incoming governor, whoever that's going to be, I'll consider that a victory. And I hope whoever that is will have spent time in those counties and not just in the areas where the most votes are, for example.
Thank you for that.
No, that's a really great idea, and we look forward to seeing how that plays out, and having a Republican in the governor's mansion.
Wait a minute here.
I'll let you two fight that out.
Yeah, that'll be one for Ben and I. But Angela, thanks again so much for coming on the show. It was great to have you. And before we let you go, this is the time to, of course, we will put the links to the studies we talked about before in the link to the podcast so that everybody can go and check those out. But if folks want to follow your work, or they want to follow you, or they want to find out more about what OBI is doing, where do they go to find all that stuff?
OregonBusinessIndustry.com. So that they can find us there. We are doing some revamping. So if people have suggestions about what they see or don't see on that website or on the socials, let us know. Now's the time. But they can find our reports, our policy principles, links to staff, all sorts of information.
Great. And I can tell that the comms team had you well prepped, because the website was just perfectly succinct. So
yeah,
very good on them. But Angela, thanks again so much for joining, and everybody, thanks again for listening. Please make sure to check us out on YouTube. You'll also have the opportunity to briefly see Angela's cat, so that's always a plus to be able to add more animals to the show. And please make sure to give us 5 stars if your platform does allow, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you, everyone.
Thank you both.